Make It Right, the manufacturing podcast.
I was recently reading a book that came out in 1951, and the author was describing the incredible pace of life, how it was hard to focus, to carve out quality time for self and family. Almost 70 years on, we're still struggling with this issue, and the distractions have multiplied exponentially. And even with the countless devices that are supposed to help us be more productive, this is being called the age of distraction. People are wearing the term busy as a badge of honor, but studies show we aren't more productive, we aren't more happy or healthy, and we aren't working less. The state of business has been downloaded to us by previous generations, and it's time for a reboot. Welcome to the Make It Right podcast. I'm Janet Eastman, and this week, my guests are two gentlemen who figured out how to break this cycle of busy and take back control. Dave McKeown is a leadership consultant and the author of a new book called The Self-Evolved Leader, and Kevin Snook is a leadership advisor and author of Make It Right, 5 Steps to Align Your Manufacturing Business from the Front Line to the Bottom Line. So, gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to each other and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Janet. It's great to be back on with you here. And Kevin, great to meet you over the airwaves.
Yeah, it's nice to be on as well, Janet. And Dave, I'm a big fan of your book. And as I was reading through your book, to me, it was really like, looking into my own soul as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we have in common, and it's going to be a great discussion.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
So, Dave, you're in California. Kevin, you're in Asia. I'm in Canada. So we're going to take this from a global perspective. We're really going to look at this problem. This busyness, this distraction problem, it's everywhere. Now, can either one of you give me an idea of the financial benefit a company can gain from getting their business and their teams aligned and refocused so that we're not all running around like chickens with our heads cut off?
I think it's a hugely important one, the issue of alignment. The reality is, I think we are too quick in our teams and groups to get to a point where we think that we've made a decision and then we go out and start implementing. But the reality is that in most cases, just due to human nature, most folks walk out of that room with a slight different understanding of what it is that we've just agreed to. And so we go off and start implementing in different ways. And so what happens is we realize that kind of like in a golf swing, when you get that moment where you strike the golf ball, if you're off by just a millimeter, the golf ball doesn't end up a millimeter away. It ends off, in the bunker, in the rough, or in my case, 3 holes over. And so we as a team have to come back and kind of assess where we're going or what we're doing or what we thought we were doing, essentially realigning each other. And if you think about just the sheer amount of time spent in doing that, add up the financial impact of everybody's salaries and maybe the meeting room that we need to book and maybe there's some refreshments, the cost of just realigning ourselves is really huge. And so my perspective is always, if you can slow down that moment of decision making so that you can get onto implementing it quicker because you're more aligned, that's going to save you money in the long run. Kevin, would love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, and I love the analogy about the golf shot. And it really is that idea around not only taking your time when you make the decision, but being very clear what your priorities are before you go into that decision-making process. Right. So for me, it's around if you're working on your priorities, you've taken the time to figure out what the company priorities are, what each individual's personal priorities are, and you get them well aligned, then the decision-making process becomes very easy. And Janet, you mentioned around, what's the cost to companies of this? And as I work a lot with manufacturing companies, those costs really go down to the bottom line. And I would say, even for relatively, if we're talking about a $30 million company in sales revenue, then the savings on this are really in the millions already. And we've got plenty of use cases where, whether you're working on scrap or effort reduction or just growing the business, we have people coming back year after year saying, Kevin, what's the next $1 million saving we're going for? And so it really is this, we're really talking about huge money. And when you look at the growth of a business, that's where it really starts to escalate.
And I guess people can't really see that, can they? Because they've been operating in a certain way. And until you show them that there is this savings there and you can really make it happen, they're really not aware of how much money they're actually burning.
Yeah, well, we become very used to what we're hanging around every day, and that becomes the normal. And one of the benefits of bringing somebody like Dave into your business is he can challenge those norms and he can look at it with a different set of eyes. And it's not that he's any smarter or he's just seen more. He's seen more of these cases in different companies and can catch you outside of your own sense of busyness.
Hmm.
And I think you're right. I by no means am I any smarter than most people in the room. But you're right, Kevin. It's definitely a degree of pattern recognition. I think it's also, and I'm sure you've experienced this. There's an element of unsexiness about doing all of that realignment around company priorities and department priorities and individual priorities that in a lot of instances people just feel like it's holding them back from doing the quote unquote actual work that we have to do, and for a lot of people there's a resistance to that initially, and what you have to do, or what I try to do, is show them that in spending a little bit more time at the upfront looking at those things, then you get out to realize those savings down the line, and what you can do with those savings, and how you can grow your business and how you can reinvest that. I'm sure you've seen something similar like that as well.
Yeah, and Dave, you talk about the unsexiness of it. That's definitely true. But I think there's another part of it as well, and that is CEOs and a lot of companies are designed to be entrepreneurial. They're looking at risk taking, growing the business, driving forward, looking outside of the company. And what I've realized just fairly recently is that when somebody comes to them and says, look, we need to improve the internal structure of the company, it's not only that they have no time for that, they don't even understand that concept because they're a different kind of beast. And as they're looking out, they're going out hunting, somebody else has to be back at home, putting the structures and the systems in place. And that's where I see a huge difference between what the COO is doing versus what the CEO is doing. And I think quite often we try to convert the CEO to be more open to the people stuff or the structure stuff. And it's only fairly recently I've been realizing this, that's trying to make a lion eat apples. It just doesn't work. What you need to be able to do is identify what they're really good at and get them focused on that part, and then find out who else in the organization is really good at building the stability, the foundation, and not put the wrong people in the wrong places.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's hugely valuable, and it's also interesting. Dynamic that sometimes arises, you've got to make sure that there's a clear demarcation between those roles as well. That I've seen often that those entrepreneurial CEOs, they pay lip service to the internal process changes that are happening, but because they're still the ultimate decision maker, they can quite often just come in and like an arsonist just start lighting fires to things like, we're not going to do that anymore, or I don't like that process, or don't put that in place. And there's got to be a clear designation of the roles and responsibilities between the CEO and the COO based around what the company needs to grow, not around what those individuals in those roles desire to do on any given day.
Yeah, and that's exactly the part where the CEO struggles, is putting those roles and responsibilities in place. Because again, that feels like it's slowing down the organization. Just let me get on. I just want to talk to some more salespeople. I just want to grow the business. And so having that interruption pattern to the CEO's normal way of thinking, I think again that's where somebody coming from outside can say, and you talk about several great examples in the book around. A lot of the way you structured the book is a conversation between somebody from outside the organization and someone who's caught in that inside way of thinking. And it is just a matter of, we call it self-awareness, but quite often for self-awareness, we need somebody else to prompt us on that. But yeah, driving that self-awareness and then knowing where those gaps are.
We talk a bit in these two books about maintaining focus. You've got to keep focus, and focus is really hard to keep these days. So, and Dave, you say right in the book, we have to break out of this cycle of mediocrity. So how do we get our attention back to focus on the things that are really important? Because if you say that the CEO is off chasing this one idea over here, well, you know, the COO is just trying to maintain the company, but they can't get anything exciting happening, and they're in this cycle of mediocrity. How do we bring this all together? What practices can you share with leaders to help them get their attention management back and get focused on the real job at hand, that vision, that North Star, as you called it in your book, Dave?
Yeah, and you teed up the start of the conversation just brilliantly, which is we've been talking about a version of this for 40, 50, 60 years, and we'll probably continue to talk about it for the next 40, 50, 60, 100 years, who knows, but it's just getting so prevalent and so fast, and just the sheer number of tugs on our attention on any given day, from phone calls and emails and Slack messages and social media and news feeds and people walking into your office, and it's just ramping up to such an extreme pace, and we have over glorified the hustle. Unfortunately, I believe we've sort of given more credence to this notion that so long as we're busy, so long as we're kicking up dust, we're making progress. And I think that that's doing us and our people a disservice, because if you're a leader that's out there that's just constantly kicking up dust, the reality is that your team underneath you are trying to scramble like crazy just to keep up with that. And so I talk about a number of different practices that leaders can do. The first one at a really high level is just to practice being present. And by that, I mean really simple on a granular level. Not having your cell phone out when you're talking with somebody, not having a laptop computer or an iPad out, essentially just trying to move technology away, taking a breath and just committing to be in front of the person that you're in front of and giving them the time and attention that they deserve and that they need from you. I think that the more that we can practice that presence and just that state of being there, the more that some of the other parts will fit together. I think the second most powerful thing that leaders can do is start to build an implementation rhythm for themselves. If you think about leadership, there are maybe 3 or 4 different horizons of focus that you have to think about. There's the long-term strategic direction of your organization or your team, sort of annual, 3 year, 5 years, that kind of time frame. Then there's the more lesser or sort of lower to ground level quarterly aspects. What are we doing this quarter? Then monthly, what do we need to get done? Then weekly and daily. And the more that you can be specific about which horizon of focus you're working out of, and to discuss that with the folks in front of you, the more beneficial that can be. Because again, to go back to those entrepreneurial CEOs, they can talk at any level, and people just believe that what they're saying is what we have to do right away. And they may not be saying that. They might be looking for some pushback against whatever it is that they've got out there. So just trying to be really mindful of what horizon of focus you're talking at can be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, Dave, I'm fully behind that as well. And I think it was Peter Gibbons on the podcast that talked about a suggestion from a CEO becomes an order. Yes. And I think that's absolutely right. This whole idea around just because he's the boss, he knows best and we've got to do whatever he says. I think being able to open up the organization to challenge everything is critical. And if you can use a tool like a prioritization matrix to actually have discussions around, well, look, this is where we see the priorities. This is why we see the priorities as they are. Now, what are we going to agree as an organization not to do? Mm-hmm. And that one just comes off the table completely. We don't talk about that for the next quarter or the next year, whichever part of your planning process you're in. And so taking things off the table. The other thing I would say that is critical is just good old-fashioned discipline. Mm-hmm. In a lot of cases, we feel like we need to pander to the needs of people who want to have their mobile phone out in a meeting. And the answer quite often is just no, that's just not going to be one of the norms. It's not going to be one of the things that's acceptable, in this type of meeting or even in this company. And so what we want to be able to do is be focused on the goal at hand, get that done, and then move on.
You were talking earlier, Dave, about how entrepreneurs, they come in with a great idea and they start kicking up dust everywhere, and the employees are all kind of going, okay, he wants us to do this now. And I was reading recently where this person was advising that if your boss comes in and you know what your priorities are, and your boss comes in and says, I think we should start doing this, that you're supposed to turn around and say to your boss, well, these are the priorities that we had laid out that I was supposed to be working on. Where do you want me to slot this in order to address this? What has to come off the table? And I think that this takes us to a conversation about, both of your books talk about the need for employees to feel empowered. And how do you make an employee feel empowered to turn around and look at their boss and say, well, I can't do what you've asked me to because you've asked me to do all of these things, and I don't know what you want me to do now. So let's talk a little bit about empowerment.
Okay, so for me, the big thing around empowerment goes in line with listening. First of all, the boss, when he comes in with his list of suggestions and his ideas, he's doing it from a good heart. I think generally people want to do the right thing. They want to come in, they want to make suggestions, they want to be helpful. But having that list of priorities very clear, having your action plan very clear up front, always gives you a frame of reference to go back to. So you're right in saying that, hey, look, where does that fit with everything else that I'm doing? And be able to have that conversation. The leader has to show a level of vulnerability, a level of not knowing all the answers. Usually there's some kind of issue with hidden communication issue between the leader and the person they're talking to. Each of us go into a conversation with something in our mind, and quite often that's not true about the other person. I've done a lot of studies within companies that I've worked with, and when I ask one level of the organization, what do you really want to achieve? They tell me. I ask the next level, what do you really want to achieve? They tell me, and it's exactly the same. But when I ask them what the other level is doing, they say completely the opposite. And so really it's being able to have that open conversation, to be able to listen with very generous ears when you hear something that you initially don't like.
Yeah, I think that there's some great stuff in there. It's interesting. I hear quite often from leaders or from folks at any level of the organization that the dilemma that you mentioned, Janet, which is the boss comes in and says, hey, I need you to do this. And most people have a tendency to just say, okay, and then try to figure out how they're going to fit it in. And that just adds to the burnout and the stress that they have as they're taking more and more on. The reality is that if we're looking for empowerment, empowerment can really only come from within. You can teach people what empowerment means. You can give them the environment in which they have the ability to feel empowered, but it's really got to come from within. And I think one of those acts of saying, hey, I really like that idea. Here's my current to-do list. Would love to talk about, where those priorities can shift, as Kevin mentioned. That's building self-empowerment in the people underneath you. And to Kevin's point, the leader has to have that degree of vulnerability, not to feel like they're being pushed back against. And I think that's one of the key transitions that we're seeing happening in the world of leadership, where we used to think that our leaders had to be so sure and confident in where we're going. There's that old adage that leaders know the way, show the way, and go the way. The reality is that in our complex environment, our leaders can't know everything, and the people that work from them know that. And so what we're moving towards in this world of vulnerability that Kevin mentioned is for a leader to say, hey, I don't know 100% everything. This is what I think. This is where I think we should go. What do you think? Do you want to come with me? I think it's going to be a heck of a ride. Okay, let's go and do it together, rather than feeling this need to be 100% confident that this is going to be the right thing for us.
Yeah, I see one of the key roles of leaders is to develop other leaders. And you can't develop other leaders by telling people what to do. You can only develop it by asking great questions, by getting them to think for themselves, by allowing them to try things and fail occasionally, and then have a supportive environment where you look at that together and say, okay, how do we review this? How do we make sure that we get the right steps in place so that that doesn't happen again next time? And so it really is around being much more authentic, much more vulnerable. And one of the first things I say when I go into any company and speaking at each level of the organization is, I don't know this company or this business or your job as well as you do. It's just, there's no way I could possibly know that. If there's somebody running a production line, they're there every minute of the day. I have no idea what their struggles and their stresses and their challenges are. They need to be able to tell me, and they need to be the ones to drive the answers to that. What I'm there for is a facilitator to help them ask questions that they may not have asked of themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that one of the dynamics that I see happening out there, because we're moving so quickly, I feel that, and there are so many variables, I feel like most leaders believe, you know what, if I can just tell you what we need to do in this instance, or if I just help you out a little bit, if I just do this for you, we're going to get through all of this stuff together more quickly. And that comes from a good place for them. Let's try and achieve our goals in as fast a way as possible. But like you said, Kevin, you can't scale building leaders off of that, because you're therefore responsible for that. Every time that there's a problem, somebody's going to start to begin to develop this sense of, oh, I've got a problem, I'll just go see Dave. He's going to tell me what to do, or he's going to help me, or he's going to be the one that's sure. And that over time, our people develop a sense of learned helplessness, which is, rather than trying to solve my own problems or feeling empowered, I'm just going to go to the boss because they're going to tell me what to do anyway, and they'll get us out of this sticky mess. It's the opposite of that empowerment that we're talking about. And I love that notion of asking better questions. That is such the crux of a great leader these days, is asking better questions. But again, that's a big mindset and behavioral shift for many people, because it takes a lot longer. There's a lot more sense of risk in it, and there's just more of that vulnerability in it too.
Dave, you work with a lot of entrepreneurial companies as well, like I do, and I see that there's not that many big companies. You know, we've got a lot of small companies, and breaking that barrier between being a smaller company and then really starting to accelerate the growth, I think this is one of those key factors. For me, the team is the dream, right? And so if you're not developing the team, you will never reach the dream. And you cannot be a big company with one person in charge. You have to be able to let that go and build the team capability in order to be able to reach your dream.
100%. And also, I think, just to allude to what you were talking about earlier and the distinction between the CEO and the COO, there comes a point in which you've got to stop viewing the individual roles in the organization from a heads basis, and you've got to think about it in terms of the hats. So too many companies are running around and their job descriptions are just whatever the person does in that job every day. And there's this sense of things can fall through the cracks. And at some point, there's got to be this transition. I was just talking to a client today about it, where you essentially you sort of say, right, we're going to put the org chart to the side. We're going to start with a blank sheet of paper, and we're going to start to say, what does this business need to run, to scale, to grow, so that it's not dependent on individuals or personified success, but that it's built on something that's more akin to a system or a drumbeat or a rhythm. And you've got to redesign the org chart for what it needs in its growth.
Yeah, and Cal Misner was talking a lot about this on the last podcast as well, Janet, around having those conversations with the employees and finding out what really turns them on at work. To me, this is another key part of it. Each time we go through this organization appraisal, if you like, or looking at the roles and responsibilities, it gives us an opportunity to fit people into the roles that are giving them strength and are helping them feel empowered and making them feel like at the end of the day, they're fulfilled in the work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have an organization design and then that sticks forever. We need to be continually looking at that, the roles and responsibilities and the people that we have in order to be able to find the right fit for each person.
100%. Sorry, go ahead, Jenna.
So, well, when Cal was talking about that in that previous podcast, he was talking about how when people finally find that position that is the perfect fit for them, they get into a kind of a nice flow. Now, Kevin, you and I talked about flow recently on other podcasts. You talk about flow in the work environment, Dave, in your book. Let's talk a little bit about what flow can feel like for an organization that's really got it happening. Dave, tell me what you've seen with a company that's really got flow.
Sure, and funny enough, it's essentially a summary of a lot of what we've been talking about. The one word for me that sticks out whenever I think about flow is clarity. So first of all, it's clarity on direction, on that vision, on where we're going, on those priorities that we have that Kevin mentioned, because that gives us the North Star. We all know where we're supposed to be headed. We can base our decision making around that. Secondly, then, is just clarity on the rules involved and the outcomes required. So if we know that we're going to enter a new marketplace, okay, well, what are the rules that are going to get us there, and what are the outcomes required from each of those rules? And then the third one, and one that I think is missing from a lot of organizations, is that clarity around decision making. So we know that drumbeat, that rhythm of decision making. We know when we can address something from a strategic perspective versus a tactical perspective. And I love what Kevin said earlier about getting to that point where you know what you're saying no to as an organization, and we're not going to review that for another 6 months or another 12 months. I think that that's so important, because there's a tendency to want to drop those new exciting ideas in, and every time we drop a new exciting idea, a new squirrel that we're going to chase or something that we're going to go after, we pull everybody, we reduce that clarity and pull everybody back into playing flockball, where we just run around trying to find the soccer ball and we kick up a bunch of dust. And so we lose that alignment, that focus that we had. And so for me, although it doesn't mean that everything's absolutely smooth every single day, it means that we understand how to address the problems in front of us, and how to address changes to the external environment or what we're working on if we need to, rather than just feeling that sense of chasing the ball everywhere. That to me is what flow in the workplace looks like.
What's it look like for you, Kevin?
No, that's a great description of it, and I think the side to me is that in manufacturing you have daily business, regular daily business, which is making the products and allowing them to go out smoothly, and within that kind of environment, flow is relatively easy because it's consistent. You may have a maintenance shift, or you may have something else that you need to be able to find a way to schedule and plan effectively, but flow in that example is fairly easy. Where it becomes much more difficult is where you introduce a new initiative, where there's some kind of disruption. And what I've found in organizations that don't have very clear roles and responsibilities, very clear roadmap of how to achieve things, then they get in a huge mess during those disruptive times. The ones that are in flow, it's almost like a pleasure. It's an exciting addition to the work, rather than a frustrating interruption to the work. And that really is, Dave mentioned it, roles and responsibilities absolutely clear, gateways for each different stage of in this case, of the initiative being developed, making sure that people have some discipline following the process. And again, this is where structure and discipline enhance freedom rather than restrict it.
I guess ultimately it's the 21st century, and the messages usually come from the top down. So it has to start with the leader. So from both of you, I'd like to hear your sense on what you believe is the ultimate role of the leader. Dave, you're calling your book The Self-Evolved Leader, and Kevin, you talk about aligned leader. So what, Dave, in your opinion, is the ultimate role of a leader?
Sure. So for me, it's to resist the urge of heroic leadership, and instead to help your team achieve their common goals, and in doing so, become the best version of themselves. That for me is what it's all about. And it mirrors exactly what Kevin said earlier. The team is the dream. If we're not building on people in what we're doing, then we're not really leading. We're just kicking up dust.
And what about you, Kevin, the aligned leader?
Yeah, for me, the two of the steps in the align process are absolutely critical. The first one is aim from the heart. and that is have a very clear vision with the organization that you could keep going back to show that clarity that Dave was talking around this is where we're going, guys, and there's a sense of excitement and team alignment towards that. The second part then for the leader is to give help and support. And the role is not to be telling people what to do, is to be watching what they do, watching the way the organization is functioning, and then seeing where help and support in different guises needs to come in. So set a very clear direction and then give the team the help and support that they need to be successful.
I guess ultimately, when we all go to work, we really want to know what we're supposed to be doing. And when we don't really understand, or if there's some confusion around what that is, that's where the problem is. So
yeah, and people are good people. I've never met an employee who intentionally came in to do a bad job that day, or to have a crappy day at work, or to go home feeling unfulfilled. I've never met anybody like that. What we need to be able to do as leaders is to bring the very best out of each individual, and setting the environment to be able to do that, and then making sure that as they go through that journey, we talk about a very clear direction. There's never a final goal for a business. A business wants to keep evolving and keep growing, but there needs to be some milestones along the way that we can celebrate. So having that opportunity to be able to give people the recognition and support that they need as they move ahead keeps the work fulfilling. And for me, that's a critical factor of continually growing.
I appreciate both of your time. We're almost out of time, so I think we better leave it there. But gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me to talk in a rather engaging discussion. And I think we probably should do this again sometime if you're both up for it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janet. Really appreciate it. And Kevin, great to have the discussion with you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too, Janet. And it's great when we have people to bounce ideas off as well. And there's a few notes that I've taken that I want to go back and look at as well. So it's fantastic to have this kind of conversation.
Thanks again, gentlemen. That's our show this week. I hope you enjoyed our leadership discussion. Dave McKeown is a leadership consultant and author of a new book called The Self-Evolved Leader, which is in stores now. And Kevin Snook is a leadership advisor and author of Make It Right, 5 Steps to Align Your Manufacturing Business from the Front Line to the Bottom Line. Kevin is also the sponsor of the Make It Right podcast. You can find his book on Amazon. Please check out our Twitter and LinkedIn feeds that you can find on our podcast page at lucidI4.com. And also subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues through iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Janet Eastman. Thanks for listening to the Make It Right podcast.